this video series, we are taking JSON data and we're integrating it into an autocomplete text. We have already done several steps here, and the next step is to do our JSON parse. So we got our JSON data previously, looks like this. And in JSON, you can kind of get an idea of what it is by looking at it. A curly is going to represent an object, and a square bracket is going to represent an array. In other words, an object is a name-value pair or a series of name-value pairs. An array are several pieces of like data or similar data. So, okay, I see I have an object here called plants, and the value of that is an array. That array contains plant objects, and the plant objects are ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common. And this very closely matches the plant DTO that we created in a previous video. So GUID, genus, species, cultivar, common, that closely matches what we have here. But okay, maybe this isn't so easy to visualize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this URL. There are several sites that we can go to that will help us to visualize JSON. I oftentimes use this JSON viewer. For some reason, I'm unable to access that tonight. So instead, I went to this one called codebeautify.org.json viewer, and this is also very nice. Both of them very nice. This also has you can just put the URL in. So I put in the URL and load. And you see what it's going to do is on the right, well, first of all, it's going to read that URL, and then on the right, it's going to parse it out and tell me what to look for. So I have an object, and then I have an array called plants, and then within that array called plants, I have, again, an array is a collection of multiple pieces of data. So you see I have several elements here which are identified by number, and so each of these is a plant object. ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common. You see the name of the field is on the left and the value is on the right. The reason why this is an array is you'll see that each of these numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, and further on down through the screen, is going to have the same fields, ID, genus, species, cultivar, common, ID, genus, species, cultivar, common, but different values. And that's okay. That's what an object is. We have fields with values that are unique to that object. So we need to read in the data here. We need to parse it. In other words, we need to change it from a string to something smarter. And then we need to save the data into a collection, or in other words, an array list of plant DTO objects. So let's do that now. We'll do one step at a time. I go to Plant DTO. I'll expand this so we can look at it in high def. In the last video, I left this little to do, and now we're going to come and pick this part up. Okay, so string request contains that JSON data we were just looking at. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to say JSON object, and we're going to say root equals new JSON object, and I'm simply going to pass in request. Okay, so this is how I get things started. I take the request data, I pass it into the constructor of a JSON object. Alt-enter. Let's go ahead. We're already handling IO exception up above in the method signature. This throws an exception as well. Let's simply add that to the method signature. And there we go. Okay. Now I'm going to say root.get JSON array. And okay, what do I mean by this? Well, we're starting with this entire blob of data. And this is the string that we've passed into that JSON object. We know that the very first thing we're going to see is a variable called plants that represents this array that follows, the entire array of data. So what I want to say here is, okay, give me back the array that is associated with that name plants. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to put this in as a key. I'm going to get back the array. And to make life easier, I'm going to put my cursor on the get JSON array, Control-Alt-V in Android Studio, which will assign it to a variable. So when I said I pass in this key and I get back an array, this is what I mean. I get back an array called plants. Okay, so I have this array. The array represents all of the red bud plants that are in my source data. All of these red bud plants, about looks like about 12 or 13 of them. So we want to interview each of those plants. Okay, we're going to need to loop or iterate. In other words, we're going to loop over every one of these plants so we have an opportunity to talk to them. The best thing to do here is a for loop. So I type in for, yeah, for I, that's fine, and I let Android Studio go ahead and fill in the blanks for me. So in a for loop, we're going to have an initialization expression, which means I want to make a variable named I, and I'm going to start it at the number 0. We're going to have a test, which means I will continue to loop until this test returns false. So the test is going to be I is less than plants dot length. And then we're going to have an iteration expression, which means every time I loop, I'm going to increment I by 1. In other words, I'm going to add 1 to I. So I is going to start at 0. After the first loop, it's going to go to 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. We have, let's say, about 13 red buds. So once I hits 14, we're going to say, okay, I'm all done. Although actually, we start counting at 0, so actually it's going to be once I hits 13, but that's the idea. So what I want to do now is I want to say plants.get JSON object. Okay, because remember this array is an array of objects. Now it's expecting an index. What's an index? Let's go back and take a look at our JSON viewer. And remember that this array, if I scroll up a little bit, the array called plants, we have a 0, a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. And not coincidentally, but on purpose, I starts at 0, and we add 1 to I every time we loop. That means the very first time around, we're going to get this object at element 0. Then I goes from 0 to 1. The next time we loop, we get the element at number 1, and then number 2, and then number 3, and so on and so forth. So I say JSON object. Well, we don't want that to always be 0, always be 1, always be 2. I'm just going to throw that I variable in there. And I is usually a pretty common loop iteration variable. Now I want to save this, the result of this getJSON object, to a variable. So in Android Studio, Control-Alt-V assigns it to a variable. I'll call it JSON plant. Okay, now we finally have each of the individual JSON plants. What we can do now is we can take the information from this JSON plant. We can save it into a plant DTO object. We can add that plant DTO object to the all plants collection, and then we return the all plants collection. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say JSON plant, okay, dot get int, and I have to give it a name. Now what's the name going to be? Let's go back to our JSON viewer. The name is this field name here, ID, okay, and then genus, and then species, and then cultivar and common. We'll need to pull each of those off one at a time. So get int, we pass in the field name, ID, okay, Control-Alt-V, we'll call it GUID, okay. JSON plant, let's get the genus, .get string, okay, the name, again, going to be genus, and then species, cultivar common, okay, get string genus, okay, whoops, terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-V, and genus, that's fine, okay, JSON plant, .get string, species, okay, terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-V, yep, species is fine. JSON plant, get string, whoops, not get, we want get string. Okay, cultivar, okay, terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-V, whoops, Control-Shift-V again, try that again, and cultivar is fine. Okay, last one, JSON plant, .get string, and what do we call the last one? I think it was common, or was it common name? It's common, okay. Common, okay, terminate with a semicolon, Control-Shift-V, and common. Okay, now we have each of the values that correspond to our field. In other words, the thing that's on the right of the colon. Now we need to do something with that. And as I mentioned, the plant DTO has nearly these exact same fields, GUID, genus, species, cultivar, common. It's a DTO, a data transfer object. You can think of it like a noun. So what I'm going to do now, let me put some comments up here. Okay, we'll say parse the JSON object into its fields and values. Okay, and for the array, I'll say get the array of plants from JSON. Okay, I'll say here parse the entire JSON string. So just get some comments out of the way here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create a plant DTO object that we will populate with JSON data. Okay, plant DTO, plant equals new plant DTO, open and close paren because it's a constructor. And now I'm just going to say plant.set genus, and then we'll pass in that genus. Okay, whoops. Okay, there we go. Let's do it in order actually. So we'll say plant.set GUID, global unique identifier, ID. Okay, plant.set species and species. Plant.set common, or let's do cultivar and cultivar. Okay, whoops, Control Z, there we go. And finally plant.set common. And you know where this is going, common. Okay, and then we're going to say add our newly created plant DTO to our collection. Oh, you know what? Okay, I messed that one up. That should be GUID, shouldn't it? Yeah, GUID. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's better. Okay, our collection, we created that in an earlier video, and that's called all plants. So I'm going to say all plants dot add and plant. Okay, and now our all plants collection should be full of the plants that we have selected on this JSON query. So at this point, I'll save, I'll debug, and let's see how we do. I still have a breakpoint here, so we'll be able to step through this, save and debug, and we'll take a look at the results. Now the debugger is stopping me from running because it's telling me I have an error here, and that is that I'm not handling that JSON exception from earlier. What I'm going to do, this is the GPS of plant, I'm going to make this catch block more generic. Instead of handling the specific IO exception type, I'm going to have it handle all exceptions. And we'll go ahead and save. Let's see if the debugger, looks like we're doing okay now, so we'll go ahead and put this in debug. Okay, the debugger is running, and the debugger is an outstanding learning tool. So don't be afraid of the debugger. We've seen this part before. I'm going to go ahead and choose F8, and we're going to request our data. Now what's interesting is because this is a background thread, you see in the emulator it's already painted our window, and we can actually start interacting with it while this background thread is still running. So I've chosen F8. F8, we create our list. Okay, now comes the important part. We parse this request. Again, I'll mouse over. We'll see if we can take a look at the request, or I can go down to my variables window. It might be easier to look at. And unfortunately, it's going off the screen of this recording, but trust me, it does have our JSON in it. Okay, so I'm going to choose F8. I'm going to tell it to parse. This is where we could have a syntax error. We don't have a syntax error, and I kind of expected that we wouldn't because I have used this JSON feed before. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to get the array, the collection of plants, and we save it in that variable named plants. Okay, now what we're going to do is I'm going to choose F8, and we should iterate about 13 times. Now I'm not going to take us through every iteration just for the sake of time, but we should see, okay, we get our first JSON object, and then we're going to pull out each of the values that correspond with these fields: ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common. Okay, now remember that our I is starting at 0. So the I value, yep, there we go, the I is equal to 0. So in this first iteration, I'm anticipating that I'm going to get ID 83, Cercis canadensis, no value for cultivar, and then common name Eastern Redbud. So let's go ahead and look. I choose F8. What's my GUID? GUID should be 83. Global unique identifier, sure enough, it's 83. Genus should be Cercis. And actually most of these will be Cercis because that is the genus for redbud. Species canadensis, sure enough, species canadensis. Cultivar, no cultivar on this one. That'll probably be blank, and it is. Common name should be eastern redbud. Eastern redbud. Now I'm going to take those, create a new plant object, and I'm going to add these values to that plant object, and finally add that plant object to the collection. Then what happens? I reach the close curly for this loop, so I F8, I go back to the top, but now that I'm back to the top, my I is going to go from a 0 to a 1 because this increment expression is going to execute. So F8, and let's make sure that the I is now a 1. Quick little mouse over there. I is now a 1. I go back to the JSON viewer, and I'm going to see that I should now be on 1, which is ID 1020, Cercis canadensis Appalachian red cultivar, Appalachian red redbud. Okay, let's see how this goes. I'll go a little bit faster on this one. F8, F8, F8. Cultivar is going to be a little funny because it contains a trademark indicator. We'll have to see how that shows up here. Okay, so GUID should be 1020. Genus will still be, but you notice that's not 83. It's now our second item. Genus is still Cercis. Species should still be canadensis. Cultivar should be Appalachian red. Appalachian red, and you see a little Unicode character there for the trademark symbol. And then common name, Appalachian red redbud. There we go. Assign this to a plant object, F8, 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 F8. One important thing, if you are doing this, make sure to declare your plant object inside the loop. If not, you end up with an interesting situation where you would get 13 copies of the same plant, actually 13 references to the same plant. So if you find that you're doing this and that every item in the array is the same, check where you're declaring that plant DTO. Check where you're declaring the variable. By declaring the variable, I mean we have a name for a variable and a type. Make sure that is inside this loop, not outside. Okay? Catches everybody about once. F8. F8. Let's just do one more iteration and we'll just start that one. So the next iteration, the I should be equal to 2. Okay, I is equal to 2. And now we are going to fetch the second item, which is 125 Cercis canadensis covey. So again, I'll hit this one a little bit quickly because we've seen this before. We just want to confirm that we are on that second Cercis canadensis. So the GUID, 125, sure enough. I'll go on down and execute through common. Common should be lavender twist, and there we go. At this point, I'm satisfied it's working properly. I'm going to choose F9, which says, okay, I no longer want to debug. Go ahead and run the program. I choose F9, give it just a few moments, and now I'm going to come back to plant name, and I know that it looks a little bit goofy just the way the coloring works on this drop-down, but if I start typing redbud, we should see, and I know it's hard to see here, but sure enough, there's Cercis canadensis eastern redbud, Appalachian red, and covey twist, the lavender twist covey. Let me go ahead and click on the Appalachian red, and there we go, Cercis canadensis, Appalachian red, redbud. So you see in this video now, we have taken a simple JSON stream, and I will post that JSON stream in the video comments. We have used just a couple of classes, JSON object and JSON array, and a loop to be able to parse through this raw data and make intelligent objects out of it. There's a whole lot of opportunity here with JSON data. I teach this course both in Cincinnati and in Chicago. Data.cincinnati-oh.gov provides a whole lot of open data, as does data.cityofchicago.org. Both of these provide a lot of open data. There's several other cities on the same initiative. But if you see over here, problem landlord list or affordable housing developments, building permits. Okay, let's click on building permits. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll go to export. And what you want to look for is an option that says JSON. And I don't see one here for this one in particular. But if you see Soda API, let's take a look at this. Soda API. don't see what I was looking for here. But let me run back and see if we can find another one. Current employee, I don't want to click on that one. Never mind. I don't want to show anyone's. Let's go to food inspections. Okay. And once again, we're going to choose export. Okay, here we go. This is what I wanted, JSON. Take this. Okay, here's your JSON data. Take this URL. This one's a bit more complicated than the simple plant places one that I did, but nonetheless, you can still take this URL, put it in one of the JSON editors here, load URL, and there we go, and load. And you can use this little editor window on the right to navigate through, okay, what's an array, what's an object, and then you know when you see the curly braces to use JSON object, when you see the square brackets to use a JSON array. So lots of data there to use. With a mobile app, you're creating value by integrating data from different sources. So make good use of it. Think about how you can combine data from JSON and also from the phone, the camera, the GPS, the accelerometer, to make an app that's making someone's life better. Let me know how it goes. Put your comments, tell me what you're working on. I'm excited to hear what kind of ideas you've come up with and if you've made a JSON parsing app that you've put on the Google Play Store. Thank you.